Hi guys, welcome back to another video. In today's video I want to do something a little bit different, and that is I want to take a look at the recent financial report that SegaSammy released. So they have very recently, I think it was the beginning of this week, they have just launched their up to March 2026 fiscal year result presentation. They do this every year, and it's just a breakdown of how the company is performing financially in each of its different sectors. You know, SegaSammy doesn't just operate in video games, it has a few different ventures it does, so it breaks down each of those. But it's quite interesting to look at, particularly for the video game side, so we can see what's performing well, what's not performing so well. And it gives us an idea of where Sega want to refocus on for the years going forward. Now, obviously, as a channel that focuses around the Phantasy Star series, I obviously have an interest in PSO2 NGS. And these financial reports can sometimes have an impact on games like that, with it being a game as a service. So I want to go through this report, just highlight some of the key findings in it, and just kind of speculate on what it might mean for players of PSO2 NGS and for the Phantasy Star series in general. I have seen a few people commenting on this report online, and I feel that some of the discourse around it is kind of taking things out of context or trying to misinterpret things. Now, whether that's deliberate or accidental, I don't know. But I kind of want to go through this and just offer my opinion on it. Again, this is purely my opinion, yours may differ. But I want to go through this and just show how I feel this might influence what Sega does going forward. So one of the first slides we have is the results highlights consolidated. This shows you a breakdown of just everything together. Now, for the figures, I'm not really going to go into the figures as such because I want to kind of focus on other things instead. But if you want to look at these figures, just be aware they are listed in billions of yen. You'll need to do the conversions for yourself on that. At a glance, you can see that we have the 2025, up to March 2025 financial year. You've got the up to March 26 financial year, and then you've also got a forecast for the 2027 financial year as well. And you can see that, you know, there are certain sections that are making a loss, certain sections are making some profit. On the right, it does go into some more detail about this. So you've got for the 2026 financial year, it says sales increased and profits decreased compared to 2025. So they've sold more, but on the other side, the amount of profit they've made is decreased. So then it says full game sales, new free-to-play titles, so F2P is free-to-play, and Rovio's performance was soft. Okay, so I have just looked into Sonic Rumble. It looks like Rovio were responsible mainly for the kind of commercial side and advertising and things like that, and the sort of community management, whereas Sega actually produced the game themselves, but it is kind of in partnership with Rovio. So basically what it says is that the performance of Rovio, the new free-to-play titles, and full game sales were soft. So by new free-to-play, you are probably looking at things, I suppose, like any of the new gacha games that they've released. So they didn't perform as expected. Next you have sales of mainstay Patchy slot titles were strong. Patchy slot and Pachinko. If you don't know what those are, Pachinko and Patchy slot are like arcade games that are very, very popular in Japan. They're kind of like gambling machines, more or less, and they are very, very popular in Japan. Sega obviously is part of the SegaSammy group, and Pachinko has always been a very, very big part of that. Finally, it says sales increased and operating loss widened due to the consolidation of two acquired companies in the gaming sector. Now, I do want to point something out at this point. From reading this, it is a little bit confusing, but I believe by the gaming sector for this, I think they're referring to arcades. I don't think this refers to actual console gaming and PC gaming. I think that comes under, I believe it's listed under entertainment later in the report. I could be wrong on this, but I believe that the gaming more refers to the arcade side. And then in bold, we have resulted in a net loss due to the recognition of impairment losses on Rovio and Stick Logic. So Sega are basically acknowledging here that they've taken two companies on. There is obviously a big cost associated with that, and because of those acquisitions, that has resulted in a net loss overall, which is kind of to be expected. You know, if a company is acquiring another pretty big company, you expect to make a loss on that and then recoup those losses later on. So I don't think that's anything to necessarily be worried about. I think the only slightly worrying thing on this is the fact that they're saying that the full game sales, new free-to-play titles, and Rovio performance were soft. So that's obviously not great. Then we have a forecast for 2027, which says they plan for an increase in sales and a decrease in profits compared to 2026, which might sound very weird initially. It says that they expect sales of new titles to increase. So that to me is in the actual video game sector. So they're expecting to sell more games in the video game sector. They want to continue to strengthen their transmedia expansion. What that is, I believe they've covered this in interviews before. I think when they use the term transmedia, I think they're referring to things like an example of this would be the Sonic movies. So things that are using Sega IP that are not necessarily games. But gaming probably just come into it to an extent as well. Yeah, that is the transmedia. So they want to continue to strengthen that. That should surprise nobody because the Sonic movies have done really well. They expect to see a profit decline due to a decrease in mainstay titles and rising costs in patchy slot and pachinko. So again, this isn't due to video games. This is all to do with pachinko. They're saying that there's less mainstay titles in the pachinko sector. So they're expecting to see a slight decline in profits because of that. And they're also expecting their losses to widen due to upfront investments aimed at establishing a foundation for future growth. This one's a little bit confusing. The first time I read this, I thought it was referring to video games, especially because it says gaming. But again, I think gaming in this report refers more to the arcade sector. I mean, obviously that can feed into the video game sector sometimes because quite often you will get arcade games that are then ported over to, to actual home consoles and everything. But I think when they're talking about gaming here, I think they're more referring to the arcade sector. So if we then move on to some of the topics, I'm just going to scan through some of these very quickly. It says, following a further review of the business plan, extraordinary losses were recorded in 2026, including approximately 0.7 billion yen as an impairment loss associated with the downsizing of operations in the Netherlands, and approximately 18 billion yen as a full impairment loss on goodwill, etc. So it is known that Sega have downsized in some areas, particularly in Europe, and they have downsized in the Netherlands in particular. So there are obviously costs associated with doing that as well. So a lot of things have happened that have caused a loss, but I don't really see any real concern. I think there's a little bit of concern with some of the main titles that they've released in the last year have underperformed, but I think a lot of these losses that they've taken on are losses they have kind of voluntarily taken on by acquiring studios, by downsizing areas and things like that. It's restructuring. So we do have a more detailed breakdown here, which is the segments, the results per segment. So yeah, you can see here. So we have gaming there, and then we have entertainment content. So they are separate things. Now, obviously, some of that entertainment might come from things like the Sonic movies, but it is a little bit confusing the way this is laid out. Again, I'm not going to go into the figures too much. You can just see that some areas have made a loss. Again, all these figures are in billions of yen, so you need to work that out for yourself. So next we have the results and the forecast by segment. So just before we go into that, there is a little disclaimer here just about the current situation in the Middle East. Obviously, with things that are going on in the Middle East at time of recording, there is a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of this is having impacts on companies all around the world. What Sega have said on this is they've said that at this time there has been no significant impact on manufacturing and sales. Going forward, supply chain disruptions may lead to rising prices and procurement difficulties for raw materials, parts, packaging materials, and other supplies. As the situation remains fluid, we will continue to closely monitor the impact. So essentially saying they haven't really noticed an impact yet, but there is the potential that we might see price increases or them having difficulties in providing, I suppose, particularly for physical products. So it's not great, but this is not really Sega's problem. This is a problem that's affecting every single company in the world. It's going to depend a lot on what happens with the situation in the Middle East. It does say here, particularly we're talking amusement machines, toys, patchy slot and pachinko machines, gaming machines. And it just says, obviously rising cost of raw materials and parts, rising logistics costs, longer production lead times, etc. So essentially anything that has a physical present. So your arcade machines, your gambling pachinko machines, any toy lines, those are all the things that might be impacted from this. So next we have a breakdown of the entertainment sector, and like I thought, the entertainment sector is the one that includes video games. So it's kind of broken down into consumer sales, animation sales, and game and toy sales. So we've got the figures there, again in billions of yen, but it's these points I want to focus on most. So for 2026, it says sales increased while profit decreased compared to 2025. Full game and some new free-to-play titles and Rovio's performance were soft, so they've already covered that previously. Interesting here, it just says some new free-to-play titles, it doesn't say all. This is where it gets really interesting though, and this is where PSO2 NGS comes in. So it does say existing free-to-play titles, NGS, subscription services, DLC, and animation area perform steadily. So I know that a lot of people, there's a lot of sort of doom posting about NGS that's been going on for, well, more since the game launched. What Sega is saying here in the report is that the existing free-to-play games are performing steadily, which I kind of read as they are performing as Sega would expect. Yeah, so it's saying that existing free-to-play have performed steadily. I kind of agree with that because, I mean, again, if you look at player chart numbers, again, don't read too much into things like Steam charts because that only covers Steam. But you can see that, you know, the player base for NGS has been pretty stable for a long time now. It's not a massive player base, particularly on the global side. Obviously, the Japanese server is a much bigger part of that. But even on the global side, the player base has been very solid. It hasn't really grown, but it hasn't really fallen off too much more either. So I would agree that NGS is probably performing steadily. Then it says licensing revenue grew steadily throughout the fiscal year. We've got to 2027. It says that they're planning for an increase in both sales and profits compared to 2026. They plan to launch 4 new full game titles based on mainstay IPs. Now, we don't know exactly what those would be yet, but when they're saying mainstay IPs, it's not going to be something niche. Unfortunately, that probably doesn't mean Phantasy Star. Realistically, you're probably looking at things like Sonic. Yakuza, I guess Stranger Than Heaven might be included in that. Yes, I would imagine that the 4 new game titles based on mainstay IPs, you probably are talking like maybe a Sonic game, probably Stranger Than Heaven is probably included in that. I mean, what would you class as a Sega mainstay IP at the minute? I mean, I guess you're talking about like maybe Atlas as well? Yeah, I'll leave that for you to speculate. So we do know we're getting 4 new full game titles. It also says free-to-play titles launched in 2026 are expected to contribute throughout the financial year. So obviously that doesn't include NGS because NGS was way before that. They expect to see a growth in licensing revenue, and they also want to strengthen sales of prize merchandise. So again, this is kind of going back into what's mentioned here, just in a bit more detail. It doesn't really go into what those 4 new titles are. But this is really interesting because it does go into how some of the games have performed. So if we look on the consumer side, so this is primarily a gaming sector here. For full games, it says both new titles and repeat sales perform below expectations. So essentially anything that released in the last financial year as a full game hasn't performed as they were expected. Now, I can't remember when Sonic Racing Cross Worlds released. I would have thought that would have done pretty well, but I guess maybe it didn't perform as Sega expected. Or maybe that launches before this financial window, I'm not sure. And then it says for next year, obviously, the sales are expected to be on par with this year. Free-to-play for 2026 says 2 new titles perform below expectations. Now, I don't know what they are. I would assume that Sonic Rumble is one of them, I would guess. If that's the free-to-play one. Not entirely sure what the other free-to-play one is. But then again, it says existing titles perform steadily. Again, this is PSO2 NGS. So NGS, as it launched before 2026, is treated as an existing free-to-play title, not a new one. It says titles launched in 2026 are expected to contribute throughout the year. And crucially, they want to strengthen operations of existing titles in the free-to-play sector. That would include PSO2 NGS. So one of the bits of miscommunication I've seen is that I've seen a lot of people saying that they've taken staff away from NGS, or that because of the Super Game project, which we'll get onto. But this here is saying that they're actually wanting to strengthen operations of the existing titles. So if anything, I would expect more focus to be put on NGS, as well as the other free-to-play games they've got. And then again, it just says Rovio's performance was sluggish, licensing revenue increased, and recorded revenue from DLC and subscriptions, etc. And going forward, they want to implement continuous updates for Angry Birds 2, which I guess Angry Birds 2 is probably the other free-to-play then. Then we've got a bit about the animation, the toy side and everything, which obviously doesn't really matter too much to us. So on this slide here, we've got a breakdown of all the games that were released and all the ones that are expected next year as well. So if we quickly go back, we can see, again, in the full game sector, new titles and repeat sales performed below expectations. So if we go back to this, we can see what's underperformed. So Rado Remastered, Mystery of the Soulless Army, Shinobi Art of Vengeance, which amazes me because Shinobi did really well, it was really well reviewed. Sonic Racing Crossworlds, which again was really well reviewed. Persona 3 Reload, Football Manager 2026, and Yakuza Kiwami 3 and Dark Ties. So all of these, according to this report, all of these underperformed, which is incredible to me. I mean, I guess it depends on what Sega's expectations are. Maybe Sega had very, very high expectations for them. But all I know is that Sonic Racing Crossworlds and Shinobi in particular were very well thought of when they were released. So that kind of surprises me. Then we've got the free-to-play ones. So these new ones were Persona 5, The Phantom X, and Sonic Rumble Party. So these underperformed. As well as, I guess, Sega Football Champions. Although how much that factors into this, I don't know, because it only released in January, and this report only goes up to March. And we do have a look at the upcoming plans as well. Now, again, just about the Super Game project, I will cover this in a little bit as well, because this does come into the report. Again, I've seen some people saying that the old, like the remakes of things like Crazy Taxi and Golden Axe have been cancelled. That is not true. They are still here. There is still no release date for them yet, but they are still on here. So then it covers things like the animation and arcade as well. Just very, very quickly on this, I just want to point out, if anyone hasn't seen it, there are upcoming plans apparently for an arcade Outrun, an arcade House of the Dead, and an arcade Eternal Champions. So I knew nothing about these, but yeah, they're on there. So after that gaming section, there is a section that that covers things like the Apache slot and the arcade side of things. Not really going to cover them for this video. Again, I'll link the report in the description if you want to read it. But after this, you have a section focused on the entertainment contents business, and more specifically, a review of their games as a service strategy. So it says they have reviewed the strategic positioning of GaaS, which is games as a service, also known as free-to-play. So for 2026, what it says is, new free-to-play titles struggled in 2026. There was a weak performance of Sonic Rumble Party. They did not achieve the creation of economic value through collaboration with Rovio. And there was a delay in the launch of some titles, which I think they're probably referring to Sonic Rumble Party with that. So it's quite clear that they are very much blaming specific areas, and Sonic Rumble Party is getting a lot of that for issues with the free-to-play games that were released that year. But then the big one that everyone is talking about is underneath. Decided to cancel Super Game. Now, Super Game, if you don't know what this was, they announced it a few years back as a new initiative. They never really went into exactly what it was. Apart from it was going to be some kind of large-scale project that was probably going to cover several different Sega IPs. but I don't think they ever really went into great detail as to what it was going to be. But there was a massive, like, huge amount of money set aside for this, and Sega were very, very excited about the prospect of this super game going forward. Well, it turns out they've decided to cancel it. The reason for that is it's probably down to market conditions, I would imagine, for the most part. It's been a very, very difficult time for the game industry in the last few years, and potentially it just wasn't really feasible. It could also be that they've seen what competitors have released. They might have done something similar, and Sega have decided to kind of pull back from it. So how this affects them going forward? They've got their future direction on here. So it says they want to review the positioning of the pillars for medium to long-term growth, and they want to lower the priority of free-to-play. Now, this might be a little bit concerning if you are a PSO2 NGS player, because it's in there lowering the priority of free-to-play. Just remember that earlier they were saying that they were going to focus on existing free-to-play titles. So I think what this is saying is that they are maybe taking the priority away from new free-to-play games. So maybe you won't see as many new free-to-play games from Sega, but the existing ones are going to still maintain support. So I wouldn't worry too much if you are an NGS player because of that. Then what it says is some of the free-to-play development personnel, over 100 people, have already been transferred to full game development teams focusing on mainstay IPs. And I think this is another area where people are getting a bit confused. So they're saying that, yes, staff that worked on free-to-play titles are being moved off them onto full games based on the mainstay IPs. However, again, earlier in the report, they have said that they are going to continue to strengthen their existing free-to-play games. So I personally would not expect to see any of the Phantasy Star team move to other areas. I think to me, it seems fairly obvious that they're going to continue to support NGS, probably with the existing team it has. I don't necessarily think it'll get any more staff, unless they redirect some more funds towards it as part of strengthening it. But I wouldn't worry about them moving staff off NGS. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think it's going to be maybe off some of the games that are not performing, or it could even be for games that they were planning to release in the next financial year. Again, it does say here that they are lowering the priority of free-to-play games. So because of that, I would guess that maybe they've cancelled some free-to-play projects, and the staff from that are probably the ones they've moved on to full game development. It does then say that Rovio will continue their efforts towards a global game as a service, but will focus on its own rebuilding first. So it sounds like they still want to do something going forward, but they want to take a step back, rebuild Rovio, get it into a position where they think it's capable of doing this, and then push forward, which I think is a really intelligent thing to do. Yeah, the super game though, again, just to reiterate, because the super game is cancelled, we have confirmation of that now. That is definitely dead in the water. It does not mean that the remakes of the classic games are cancelled. They are a totally separate thing. They were part of a different project that Sega was doing. So currently, unless anything changes after this video, the games like the remakes of Golden Axe and Crazy Taxi and Jet Set Radio and things like that, they are all still being developed as far as we're aware. There's still no release date for them or anything yet. And whether they get delayed or not as a result of this, I don't know, but it sounds like they are still in development. Again, as well, just another confirmation at the end, we do have a full rollout schedule of all the games that are coming out that have been announced so far. And you can see at the bottom, we still do have, we've got the new Virtua Fighter project, Crazy Taxi, Golden Axe, Jet Set Radio, Streets of Rage, new Alien Isolation. They are all still in development. They're all still, to be determined for a release date. Nothing's been confirmed yet, but they are still on there. So if you were worrying about the cancellation of the super game affecting things like the Jet Set Radio remake, I wouldn't worry. It looks like it is still on there and still planned to be released. It's just at the moment we don't know when that's going to be. It's also the same kind of thing for the animation and investment areas and the toy areas as well. And that brings us to the end of the report. So it's quite an interesting read. Now, where does this leave us in regards to NGS? So they've already said in the report that existing free-to-play games are performing steadily. They've said that they want to strengthen the focus on existing free-to-play games. I think that probably leaves NGS in a fairly good spot. They've also said that there is going to be less focus on free-to-play going forward, but I don't think that really affects NGS because I think that is more targeted towards planned new free-to-play games, not so much ones that have already been released. Now, obviously, the slight issue with that is that whenever it does become time to replace NGS with whatever that may be, will Sega still be in this position of wanting to move away from free-to-play games? Could that potentially affect whatever the next Phantasy Star game is if they decide to go the free-to-play route again? It's kind of hard to say, and I think it's honestly, I think it's almost pointless to speculate on that because the next Phantasy Star realistically is probably not going to be for a few years at least. In regards to a replacement for NGS anyway, whether we get anything else before then, who knows? I think if there's going to be a replacement for NGS, I would expect it probably a few years' time yet. I think that we're still a little way off. Sega's financial situation could have completely changed by then, and the way they want to do business could have completely changed by then as well. So I think trying to speculate on that is not really that productive, honestly. I think for now we can only really look at the current financial year that's just ended, well, the one that's just ended, and the one that's just started as well, and see what Sega's plans are for those years. You know, this report only covers up to what they might want to do up to maybe 2029, and even that is very, very vague details. So things could completely change by the time we get there. So honestly, I don't think this affects NGS a great deal. Again, it does sound like here they are going to strengthen the operation of existing free-to-play titles. I think this stands NGS in pretty good stead. NGS is an existing free-to-play title, so... And I don't think the loss of staff from free-to-play games is going to affect NGS because I think that's going to be more from maybe games that were planned, not games that are out already. So yeah, overall, I wouldn't really worry too much if you are an NGS player. I don't think this financial report is too negative overall. But it is interesting to see what Sega's focus is on at the moment. It just goes to show as well that even if you produce games that are critically acclaimed and are really adored by fans, it might not necessarily go down as sales. You know, they've released games like Sonic Racing Cross Worlds, you know, that have performed very, very well. The new Shinobi game as well. And unfortunately, that hasn't really translated to the sales they wanted. But again, you can see here it says new titles and repeat sales performed below expectations. So it is really surprising that with games of that quality that they are still not performing as well as Sega would like. But I suppose we don't know what Sega's expectations are. So, and that's not something to go into in the report. Ultimately, I think it's kind of a bit of a watch and wait. It is very interesting that they have cancelled the Super game. I'd had a suspicion that maybe they were going to cancel it for a little while because they had gone a little bit radio silent on it for quite a long time. Hadn't really provided any updates or anything. So I was a little concerned that they had cancelled it. Ultimately, we don't know exactly what that Super game was going to be. And we know it probably wasn't anything connected to Phantasy Star anyway, so I don't think that really has any impact on us as PSO2 players. If anything, we might get some more staff in the NGS team as a result of people being reassigned from Super Game Project, potentially. Yeah, I'm going to end that one there for today. Again, I will leave a link to this report in the description if you are interested in reading it. It is quite interesting. There is a lot of, obviously, financial speak in it, but it is quite interesting to look into and just see what is actually performing well at Sega, what's not performing well, what the plans are going forward. And it's kind of fun trying to theorise on what that might mean for the games that we actually play. Yeah, I wanted to do this because I know there has been a little bit of misinformation, like online particularly, just about what this report means. I've seen a few people saying that this is going to be like the death of NGS because they're moving away from free-to-play, and I don't think that's the case at all. I think, if anything, it's the opposite because they are, again, in this report it says they are going to strengthen the operations of the existing free-to-play titles. It is only the new free-to-play games that they're moving away from. And even then, it might just be that they're reducing the amount of free-to-play games they make going forward. It doesn't mean they're stopping them altogether. I think it's a very, very important distinction. So I wanted to do this just to try and clarify what my thoughts are on it. Again, just to reiterate, this is entirely my opinion. you may read this and have a completely different conclusion from it. But that's just what I think about this report. So yeah, we will end that video there for today. If you have enjoyed it, please consider either liking, subscribing, or joining as a member on YouTube if you want to. You can also follow or sub over on my Twitch channel, which is SectionSkyly. And I also do have a X and a Bluesky and the Discord server you can join as well, so feel free to join any of those. We will do some more videos going forward. I think there's going to be another video coming soon for PSO2 NGS covering some of the musical side of the game. And then going forward, we will try and do a few more videos. I realise that there hasn't been too many video uploads recently. That's just because I've been kind of taking a step back from the YouTube video side a little bit. And also because of some stuff IRL that's been kind of getting in the way of it as well. But hopefully that'll be resolved soon and I should be able to get back to slightly more regular uploads. Yeah, whatever you're doing, have a great week and I'll see you guys in the next one.